The morning of her brother's engagement party, Lee Calloway stood in her kitchen at 6 a.m., pressing a dish towel against the back of her neck because the anxiety had already started making her sweat. She told herself it was excitement. That's what she'd been telling herself for months. The catering deposit was $4,200. She'd paid it in March, right after Spencer called from Vancouver to tell her he was proposing to Dana. The venue, a restored heritage farmhouse outside of Guelph that Dana had described as literally the only place I could ever imagine getting married, had cost $9,000 just to book. Then there was the rehearsal dinner, which Lee had quietly agreed to host at her own home because Dana's parents, Gerald and Patricia, were flying in from Calgary and didn't want to feel like strangers in a restaurant. Lee had spent 2 weekends painting her dining room. She'd bought a new tablecloth. She was 38 years old. She owned a small event planning company she'd built from nothing after their parents died. First their mother, when Lee was 24 and Spencer was 19. Then their father 2 years later, a man who seemed to have simply decided the world wasn't worth the trouble without his wife in it. Lee had handled the estates, the grief, the mortgage on the house. Spencer was still living in and the tuition bills that kept arriving for a full semester after the funerals. She'd done it without complaint, or at least without the kind of complaint that anyone had to actually hear. Spencer had grown into a man who was handsome and charming and deeply, constitutionally unaware of what things cost. Not money, specifically. He knew the price of things. What he didn't seem to grasp was the cost. The getting up early and the lying awake late, the phone calls and the spreadsheets, the quiet accumulation of effort that made other people's comfort possible. Lee had watched him move through life in a kind of permanent golden haze, and she had loved him fiercely through all of it, because he was her brother, and he was all she had left. She had been a little wary of Dana from the start. She'd tried not to be. Dana was beautiful and ambitious, and she loved Spencer in a loud, demonstrative way that Lee could recognize as genuine even when it made her slightly tired. What Dana also was, Lee had come to understand gradually and then all at once, was a woman who had never in her life been told that she was asking for too much. The engagement party went well on the surface. Lee had organized everything. The antipasto boards, the string lights, the playlist, the custom banner. She'd driven 40 minutes each way to pick up the cake because the baker didn't deliver. Dana had floated through the evening in a yellow sundress, accepting congratulations, and at the end of the night she'd hugged Lee and said, "You're so good at this stuff," in a tone that managed to make it sound like a compliment about a trade skill rather than a human quality. Spencer said, "She really loves it, Lee. You can tell she loves everything you put together." Lee had driven home alone and sat in her driveway for a while without getting out of the car. The wedding date was set for the following June, a Saturday. The farmhouse had a maximum capacity of 120 guests. Dana's initial list had 167 names on it, and when Lee gently pointed this out, Dana said, I know, we'll cut people," and then did not cut anyone, but instead called the venue and asked if they could add a tent. The tent cost $3,000. Lee paid it. She added it to the spreadsheet she kept in a folder on her laptop called Spencer Wedding, which by February had grown to include 31 line items totaling just over $86,000. She was not doing this to be repaid. She needed to be very clear about that even to herself. She was doing it because their parents were gone and there was no one else to do it. And because Spencer deserved a beautiful wedding, and because she admitted this to herself in the way you admit things only in the very early morning or the very late night. She wanted to be needed. She wanted to be the kind of family that showed up. She had been practicing for this her entire adult life. What she had not accounted for was Dana's mother. Patricia arrived from Calgary 3 days before the wedding and immediately began making observations. The centerpieces were too tall. People couldn't see each other across the table. The menu had too many vegetarian options and not enough beef. The seating chart had placed her sister-in-law at a table that was, in Patricia's assessment, practically in the kitchen. She delivered these observations directly to Lee, as though Lee were a hired vendor rather than the bride's future sister-in-law and the person who had in fact paid for the centerpieces. Lee adjusted what she could. She smiled. She sent 3 emails to the venue coordinator in a single afternoon. The morning of the wedding, she was at the farmhouse by 7, overseeing setup, making sure the florist had the right timeline, confirming with the caterer that the dietary cards were in the right places. She was wearing a dusty rose dress she'd bought specifically for the day, and she'd had her hair done, and she felt, for the first hour, before everything started, genuinely happy. Dana arrived at 9 with her bridesmaids and her mother, and a kind of controlled energy that Lee recognized from her own work. The specific alertness of someone who has decided that today everything must be perfect, and is prepared to be very unpleasant if it isn't. She swept through the bridal suite, checked the mirror, approved the flowers, and then turned to Lee with an expression that Lee would replay many times in the weeks that followed. "Can you give us the room?" Dana said. Lee looked around. There were 5 other women in the bridal suite. Patricia was in the corner applying lipstick. "Sorry," Lee said. "We need a minute. Just the girls." Dana smiled, the way you smile at a waiter to indicate you're ready for the bill. "You understand." There was a beat. One of the bridesmaids, a woman named Tamara who Lee had met twice, looked at the floor. "Of course," Lee said and left. She stood in the hallway outside the bridal suite for a moment. Then she walked downstairs and found the catering coordinator and asked about the timeline for the cocktail hour, because she needed something to do with her hands. She did not tell Spencer. She considered it and then decided against it, because what would she say? That his fiancé had asked her to wait outside? It would sound small. It felt enormous, but she knew it would sound small. The ceremony was beautiful. The afternoon light through the old farmhouse windows was exactly the kind of light that people spend weeks trying to describe, when they're trying to explain why a wedding felt like a wedding. Spencer cried during his vows, which he'd written himself, and even Lee standing at the back, because by the time the processional started, there had been a small seating crisis and she'd quietly given up her chair, felt her chest go soft watching him. The reception was where things went wrong. Lee had been placed at a table near the back of the tent. Not the family table, which was near the front and held Spencer, Dana, their respective parents, and in the case of Dana's parents, a rotating cast of aunts and cousins. Lee was at a table with 2 of Spencer's friends from university and their partners. People she liked perfectly well but who were not, in any meaningful sense, her family. She sat down, unfolded her napkin, and told herself it didn't matter. The speeches happened. Gerald gave one that went 9 minutes and included an extended metaphor about golf. Dana's maid of honor gave one that made everyone cry. Spencer gave one about how much he loved Dana, which was wonderful, and then at the end said, "And to my sister Lee, who has done more for me than I could ever put into words, thank you," which also made people cry, including Lee, in the back by the tent wall, who pressed her fingers carefully under her eyes to avoid ruining her makeup. She told herself, "See, he knows. He knows what this cost." She was almost to the dance floor to congratulate him when Patricia intercepted her. Patricia was a small woman with precise blonde highlights and the kind of confident posture that comes from decades of being the most important person in every room she entered. She had a glass of white wine in one hand and an expression that suggested she had been building up to this conversation. "Leigh," she said, "we need to talk about the tent." Leigh stopped. "The tent? There's a gap in the side panel, you can feel a draft. Dana is going to be cold during dinner." Patricia looked at her directly. "I assume you're the one to speak to about this. I'll go check on it," Leigh said. "I'll talk to the venue staff. It should have been caught earlier," Patricia said. "This kind of thing is why you hire professionals." Leigh absorbed this sentence. "I'll take care of it," she said. She found the venue coordinator, who was already handling it. She stood near the back of the tent for a few minutes, watching the staff secure the panel, and she felt. She would be honest about this later. The specific nauseating clarity of someone who has made a very long, very expensive mistake. It was during dessert that things came apart completely. Lee had gone looking for Spencer, wanting to give him the card she'd been carrying in her clutch all day. Not a wedding gift card, but a personal one, handwritten, the kind of thing she'd spent an hour on the previous Tuesday night, because she was that kind of sister. She found him near the bar, talking to his best man, and she touched his arm and said his name. He turned, and for a moment his face did something complicated. "Lee," he said. "Hey, can this wait? We're kind of in the middle of." "It's just a card," she said. "I wanted to give it to you today. Can you just give it to me later? Or put it on the gift table?" She put it on the gift table. She went back to her seat. She drank most of a glass of wine more quickly than she normally would. It was Dana who came to find her 20 minutes later. Leigh saw her moving through the tables, still in her dress, still beautiful, the kind of bride who doesn't wilt in the late afternoon heat, and felt a small involuntary tensing, the way you feel when you see weather coming. Dana sat down in the empty chair beside her, which had been empty all evening because the friend who was supposed to be there had cancelled last minute. "Leigh," she said. "I want to talk to you about something and I hope we can be adult about it." "Okay," Lee said. "You've been hovering today. I've noticed it, my mom has noticed it, some of our guests have noticed it." She folded her hands on the table. "I know you've been involved in the planning and I appreciate that. But today is my day. And I think it would be better for everyone if you took a step back, enjoyed yourself as a guest." Leigh looked at her. "I'm not sure I know what you mean." "I think you do." Dana's voice was gentle in the way that very sharp things can be gentle, careful, precise, designed to cut without looking like cutting. "You've been checking on things all day, talking to the staff, it's making it feel like, I don't know." Like you're working. And today isn't about work. I wanted to make sure everything went smoothly, Lee said. And it has. So you can relax now. Dana stood up. Then she added as though it had just occurred to her, actually I think it would be nice if you just headed out after dinner before the dancing starts. Give us some space to celebrate with our closest people. The table went slightly wavy. Lee blinked. I'm Spencer's sister, she said. I know that. Dana smiled. The smile didn't change anything about her eyes. And Spencer loves you. But tonight we need to celebrate with our family, and I think you know that the dynamic has been a little complicated. My mother finds it hard to relax when you're here. I'm just trying to make things easier. She left before Lee could answer. Lassie sat very still for what felt like a long time. The band started playing something she didn't recognize. People were moving toward the dance floor. At the front of the room, Spencer was laughing at something his best man had said, his head thrown back, completely at ease. She waited for him to look for her. He didn't. She found her clutch. She found her jacket. She walked out through the side door of the tent into the evening air, which was cool and smelled like cut grass and car exhaust from the parking lot. And she stood there for a moment doing a very specific kind of breathing that she had learned after her father died and had never fully stopped needing. Then she took out her phone. The florist was the first call. Lee had a relationship with this particular florist going back 4 years. They'd worked together on dozens of events, and the woman on the other end of the phone, Greta, knew Lee's voice immediately. Lee explained, calmly and precisely, that she was canceling the remaining balance on the floral account. The flowers had already been delivered. She wasn't trying to undo what had been done. But the second payment, the final installment that was scheduled to process on Monday, she was stopping it. Is everything okay? Greta asked. Not really, Lee said, but that's not your problem. I'll follow up in writing tonight. The catering coordinator was next. This was more complicated because the catering company had a clause about cancellations after service began, and Lee knew this because she had negotiated the contract herself. But Lee also knew that she had overpaid the deposit, intentionally, because she'd wanted to ensure they prioritized the event and that the overage was significant enough to cover the argument she was about to have. She did not have the argument. The coordinator, a young man named Ben who had been genuinely helpful all day, listened to her very carefully and said he would need to check with his manager. That's fine, Lee said. Tell your manager that the outstanding balance on this account is mine to authorize. And I'm authorizing it to 0. She was still in the parking lot. The lights of the farmhouse were warm and gold through the windows. She could hear the bass line of whatever the band was playing now. Something danceable. Something that meant people were happy in there. The venue had a separate post-event cleaning fee that Lee had agreed to absorb. She called the coordinator and explained that she would not in fact be absorbing that fee, and that the invoice should be directed to the groom. She was polite. She was very specific. She said Stepher Calloway and spelled his last name. She sat in her car in the parking lot and sent 11 emails between 8:15 and 9:45 p.m. Some of them were short. Some of them were longer. All of them were, she would think later, extremely clear. She did not cry until she got home. She cried for a long time actually, the kind of crying that isn't sad so much as it is just releasing pressure, the way a valve releases steam. She sat on her bathroom floor with her back against the tub and her dusty rose dress still on, and she cried until she was empty. And then she washed her face and changed into her oldest pajamas and made herself tea and sat at the kitchen table with her laptop. She had a good lawyer. Her name was Margot. Wait, no. The lawyer's name was Cecile Drummond, a woman Lee had used for her business contracts for 6 years. No nonsense and very good at what she did. Lee sent her an email at 10:12 p.m. with the subject line, question about recoverable expenses. Can we speak Monday? And went to bed. She slept, which surprised her. Spencer called the next morning. His voice was the way she hadn't heard it since they were teenagers. Tight, confused, a little frightened. Was a voice it's a situation they don't know how to navigate. What happened? He said. Lee poured herself coffee. She'd been awake for an hour, had already walked around the block twice, had already made a list. A lot of things happened, she said. Which part are you asking about, Lee? The caterer is saying there's a dispute on the account. The venue sent something about a cleaning deposit not being paid. Dana's mom called this morning about the flowers. The florist will be in touch with you directly, Lee said. So will the tent rental company. I meant to call them last night but I forgot. I'll do it today. There was silence. Why are you doing this? Because I paid for those things, Lee said. And I'd like to stop paying for things that I'm asked to leave. What does that mean? It means your wife asked me to go home before the dance started, Spencer. It means I've spent $86,000 on your wedding. And your mother-in-law told me I should have hired a professional, and your wife told me to leave so her family could celebrate. She took a sip of coffee. I didn't make a scene. I left. And then I stopped paying. The silence was longer this time. She didn't mean, she meant it, Lee said. She meant every word, and honestly, the thing that broke my heart wasn't even Dana. It was that you didn't look for me, Spencer. Not once. I was in that room for 6 hours and you didn't look for me once. He didn't say anything. She heard him breathing. I love you, she said. But I am not going to keep giving and giving to people who treat me like I'm the help. I can't. I don't have anything left if I do. She gave him the name of Cecile Drummond's office. She said they'd need to work out some of the payment disputes through proper channels because several vendors were going to have questions about who owed what. She told him she hoped the honeymoon was lovely. She knew they were going to Portugal. She'd helped them book the hotel. She wasn't going to do anything about that. It was already paid for and she wanted him to have a good trip. Then she said goodbye and hung up. Cecile was on the phone with her by Tuesday afternoon. The situation was, as Cecile noted with professional calm, a bit unusual. Several of the vendor contracts had been signed by Lee directly, in her own name, as the organizing party. Others had Lee listed as the payer but Spencer and Dana as the clients. It would take some untangling and some of the vendors might dispute the reclaimed deposits. What am I actually looking at recovering? Lee asked. Realistically, between 30 and 50,000, depending on how cooperative people are. The florist seems straightforward. The catering is messier. What about the venue? The cleaning deposit is $500. You'll get it back. Lay laughed, a short involuntary sound that surprised her. Okay, Lay, Cecile said. Can I ask you something? Sure. Did you document the conversation? The one where you were asked to leave? Lay thought about the parking lot, her clutch, the evening air. No, she said. It was just the two of us. Okay, we'll work around it. But going forward for anything like this, document everything. I will, Lee said. I'm very good at documentation. I just forgot for a while that I needed to document my own life. It took 3 months to fully resolve. Spencer and Dana retained their own lawyer, which Lee had expected. There were some uncomfortable emails through the lawyers about the deposit on the farmhouse, which Lee had paid in full, and which the venue ultimately agreed to split back along the original invoices. The catering company sided with Lee, which surprised her and shouldn't have, because she had been a client of theirs for years and had referred them probably a dozen times. In the end she recovered $41,000 and some change. She didn't feel triumphant about it, exactly. Triumph would have required wanting something she'd gotten. What she'd wanted was a brother who looked for her at his own wedding. That was the thing she didn't talk about publicly, or even to most of the people she was close to. Her friend Bet, who had sat on Lee's couch the week after the wedding and listened and said all the right things. Her colleague David, who had brought her lunch twice and not made a big deal of it. Even Cecile, who had been professional and kind. What Lee came back to, in the small hours of nights that became less sleepless as the months went on, was the specific visual of Spencer laughing with his best man, while she stood at the gift table with a card she'd spent an hour writing. She had made herself invisible for so many years, making everything smooth, and she had not noticed until the moment Dana said the words, I think it would be nice if you just headed out, that she had never once in all that time asked to be seen. She started therapy in September, not because she was falling apart. She was in fact, holding together quite well. Her business was doing better than it had in years. She'd taken on a new associate and delegated approximately 30% of the tasks she used to do herself out of some unexamined compulsion. But because she had a feeling, sitting in her car in various parking lots, that she was arriving somewhere and she wanted to arrive clearly. Her therapist was a woman in her 50s who had a practice on the 3rd floor of a building on King Street West, and in their second session, she said to Lee, when did you decide that being needed was the same as being loved? Lay looked at her for a long moment. I don't know, she said. But I think I was pretty young. Spencer reached out in November. A text, first. Not an apology, exactly, but something approximating acknowledgement, the kind of message that says I know something went wrong without committing to a position on what. Lee read it twice and put her phone face down on her desk and went back to the proposal she was drafting. She responded 3 days later. Not warmly, not coldly, factually. She was open to having a conversation when he was ready to have it honestly. That conversation happened in December, in a coffee shop on Queen Street, just the two of them. Spencer looked tired in a way that was new, not the appealing, slightly rumpled tiredness of someone who'd been having fun but something heavier. He'd aged somehow in 6 months. He told her that the honeymoon had been good, that they'd gotten the apartment sorted, that the first few months had been. He paused here, an adjustment. Is she good to you? Lee asked. He looked at his coffee. Usually, he said. Lee let that sit. She was wrong, Spencer said finally. What she said to you, I've thought about it a lot. She was wrong and I should have noticed sooner. That night. He looked up. I was so focused on everything going right that I forgot to check if you were okay. I know, Lee said. Does that help? Me saying that? She thought about it genuinely before she answered. A little, she said. Yes. A little. They didn't hug when they left. That surprised her too. She'd been prepared for it to feel either like too much or like nothing, and it just felt like two people who would have to figure out, slowly and without a map, what they were going to be to each other now. She walked back to her office. It was a cold December afternoon, the sky the particular flat white of a Toronto winter, and the sidewalks were full of people moving fast with their heads down. She stopped at a corner and waited for the light, and she noticed with something that took her a moment to identify as satisfaction, that she was not thinking about anyone else's comfort. She was just standing at a corner in the cold in her own coat, in her own life, waiting for the light to change so she could keep moving. It changed, she crossed.